Kitty Genovese, a social psychology case study. We're going to focus on the bystander effect and the diffusion of responsibility. So, Kitty Genovese is a story that we're going to talk about. Crazy story that happened in on the morning of March 13th, 1964. And because of this story, psychologists, especially social psychologists, had to look into why these events happened. So let's go over what these events were. So she was a young woman. You see a picture of her right there. She was walking from her car to her apartment. As she neared her house, a man approached and started chasing her. As he caught her, he stabbed her multiple times. As she was attacked, she began to scream, "Oh my God, he stabbed me, help me." So remember what he said, or what she said, sorry, because of what happens afterwards. So it was originally thought that as many as 38 people actually heard her screams or saw the attacks, yet no one went to her aid. So think about that. If you heard someone screaming and saw someone being stabbed, what would you do? So during this, attack, eventually one neighbor yelled at the attacker to leave the girl alone. So, you can see the picture where it happens. Um, it happened in Kew Gardens in Queens, New York. So you can kind of see the street of where this is taking place. So one neighbor comes out, yells. So this is actually on the street. So she's walking from her car, and you'll see some other diagrams. So you can kind of see where it's happening. One neighbor yells out the window, I think it was, and the attacker leaves. The neighbor just goes back inside though, right? So the attacker was originally scared off, fled Genovese and staggered. So Genovese, who was just stabbed, she starts to stagger towards her apartment to try to get to safety. Well, no one else came to her aid. The person who yelled went back inside, and 10 minutes later, Genovese's attacker returned. Right, so he realizes, hey, no cops are coming, no one else is coming. So he returned back to where the scene of the crime was, but could not find her in the parking lot. So then he literally walks around, looks around the neighborhood to try to find her. So eventually, after searching the parking lot, cars, and nearby train station, the attacker found Genovese lying barely alive in the hallway of her own apartment building. So now, before the first attack happened on the street. This isn't like the middle of the night, like 2 a.m. Um, but so there's not a lot of people necessarily up, but it was in the street where people had views. You'll see there's apartment buildings right across the street. But now she's like in the stairwell of her own apartment building where people can't see. So now out of view of the street and those that may have heard or seen any sign of the original attack, he proceeded to further attack her, stabbing her several more times. As she's lying there dying, he sexually assaults her and steals the $49 from her and left her dying in the hallway. So the attack spanned approximately half an hour from the original attack to when he finally left. And you can kind of see the diagram of what happened. So you got the parking lot here, right? Mosley, that's the person who committed the crime. His car was here. Wait for her to get out of the parking lot. She starts to walk out of the parking lot. He chases her. This is where the first attack happened. Notice there's a bar not too far down. These are all the apartment buildings, so these are where all the witnesses saw it happening from across the street. And I understand not necessarily coming out, but you could call the police. So someone yells, Mosley runs away, and then Kitty Genovese goes back around, stumbles around the building, and this is where her apartment was, and this is where the second attack happened. But they had a police call block there. Obviously, when you're in a situation like this, you might not be thinking clearly, and she was just stabbed. But there was a police call block. There was a bar there. Because you have to remember, they didn't have cell phones back then. All right, so they had pay phones and these police call blocks. So you can kind of see the layout of how how everything went down. This is what it looks like in present day. So a few minutes after the final attack, a witness, a neighbor, Carl Ross, called the police. Police and medical personnel arrived within minutes of the call. Genovese was taken away by ambulance and died en route to the hospital. So while original reports of as many as 38 witnesses may have been overstated, at least a dozen neighbors did witness the attacks. So of the minimum 12 people who actually did witness the attacks over, 30, 35 minutes, one person yelled at the attacker and then didn't do anything else. And one person, 35 minutes after the attack started, called the police. And the police were there within minutes. So now imagine if one of those witnesses that, were across the street from the first attack, if they just called the police. Once again, I understand not necessarily getting involved because it could be dangerous, especially nowadays with how many people have weapons and guns. But minimum you could do is call the police, or maybe throw something and run, right? Distract them, right? So explanation or excuse. They did, write a book about this called 38 Witnesses, and there is a documentary on Amazon Prime that we might watch called The Witness. So a later investigation revealed that approximately a dozen, probably not the original 38 that we said before, individuals heard or observed portions of the attack. So the report stated that only one witness was aware she was stabbed in the first attack, and only one was aware of the second attack. But imagine that someone was actually aware that she was stabbed and didn't do anything. One thing if it was an argument or whatever, as you're going to see some of the excuses were. But one person knew that she was stabbed and literally did not do anything to help out. So while many were entirely unaware that an assault or homicide was in progress, some thought it was a loveless quarrel or drunks leaving the bar outside when the first attack approached. So if they thought it was drunks leaving the bar, well, that means there are people nearby that probably should have been able to help. A lover's quarrel, she's yelling, "Help me!" He's stabbing me. I don't care if they did know each other and it's a lover's quarrel. That's not right, right? You should know that that's more than just a lover's quarrel, and even if they did know each other, that someone should step in and at least, once again, minimum, call the police. So here's the attacker, Winston Moseley, who was later arrested in connection with the burglary. He confessed not only to the murder of Kitty Genovese, but also to the murder and rape of two other people. So now imagine if they had, called the police and got him with Kitty Genovese. Maybe that would have stopped other attacks from happening. So Moseley gave such vivid details of the night he killed Genovese, including leaving his house and his wife at 2 a.m. to go look for a woman to attack and kill, which was the third time he had done so. So obviously he had some mental issues if this is what he would do. It wasn't like, oh, an accident or, something got out of hand. He was literally on the hunt looking for someone to kill. So the public reaction. The lack of reaction by people who witnessed some or all of the attack outraged the public. The psychology world was forced to research how and why people fail to act in certain situations. And this is what they came up with. First term, that you should know, is diffusion of responsibility, which is a social phenomenon which tends to occur in groups of people above a certain critical size when responsibility is not explicitly assigned. Right? So if you're assigned responsibility to do something or help someone, then you're more likely to help. But if you haven't been assigned a particular task, then everyone just kind of looks at each other. Maybe you know what I'm talking about if you've been in those situations. Some examples would be like, no one raindrop thinks it caused a flood, right? So you got these massive floods, but you got these tiny little raindrops. It's not going to harm anything, but everything, but you put them together, and obviously it does. Other examples are firing squads, right? So you have many people shoot the person, and actually a lot of times they only one person actually has the bullet and everyone else has blanks, but no one knows who has the actual bullet, as a diffusion of responsibility for who actually killed the person. Or cleaning in common spaces. Maybe you have this in your house. When you guys go off to college next year, maybe you'll see this, or the few years after that, if you live in a frat, sorority, or an apartment, dorms, you got these common areas. Well, no one tends to take responsibility of these common areas, and sometimes they just become a mess because people are like, well, why should I clean up after you, right? They might clean up their own rooms, but the common area that you all share, well, who's responsible for cleaning it up? And a lot of times people just look at each other and don't do anything. Also, we have the bystander effect, which is very similar to diffusion of responsibility. So this is a social psychological phenomenon in which individuals are less likely to assist in an emergency situation when other people are present. So the probability of help is inversely proportional to the number of bystanders. As group size grows, odds of helping decreases. So if you see someone in an emergency situation and there's a lot of people around, the more people around is actually, there's less likely for you to help. Because think about it, a lot of people, like, they kind of look around always waiting for someone else to go help the person, right? That's called the bystander effect. Where if it's a small group, if you're like the only one around, only one or two people, well, the responsibility kind of falls on you because there's no one else that can help out. All right, so this is the bystander effect. So the bigger the group is, the less likely you are to actually help someone that's in need. We have the social exchange theory. This is a belief that all relationships are formed by the use of a subjective cost-benefit analysis and the comparison of alternatives. So when a person feels the cost of a relationship outweighs the perceived benefits, that person will leave the relationship. And it could be a friendship, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be a romantic relationship. So think about like the nerdy kid who does like the jock's homework, and I'll be friends with you, right? So you can be popular by association. Well, if that jock is always making fun of the nerdy kid and being mean to him, well, eventually it's not going to be worth being friends with him, so he's going to leave that relationship. Forget that. I'm not going to do your homework anymore to be friends with you. I'd rather, be with my old friends. And so this could work in any type of relationship. Like if you're with someone maybe because they're very attractive, but yet you don't like their personality or you don't like the way they act, maybe they're mean. Well, eventually that cost is going to be too much, and you're going to leave that relationship, right? So that's all the social exchange theory is saying is you just look at the costs and benefits, and if the costs outweigh the benefits, then you leave that relationship. Empathy altruism. Right, is the theory that people help others out of genuine concern for the well-being of the other person. Right, so you help people not because you want anything in return, just because you're concerned about them. So altruism is a vocab word a lot of you guys might have heard of before. It's sacrificing the good of oneself for the well-being of others. So you do something out of the goodness of your heart. You don't expect anything in return. So according to the empathy altruism hypothesis, if you feel empathy towards another person, you will help them regardless of what you can gain from it. So if you have empathy towards someone, then you're more likely to help them. And so you see some examples down there. You have like organ donors and blood donors, right? So if you donate blood just to help people out, that's an altruistic behavior. Now, if you donate blood just to get out of class, that's not as much, altruism as you do it just to help people out. The Good Samaritan Law. So the Good Samaritan laws protect people from liability when they choose to aid others who are in peril. So it's intended to reduce bystander hesitation to assist for fear of being sued or prosecuted for unintentional injury. So sometimes you hear these crazy stories where people try to help people and they're like, I didn't want your help, and they sue them. Or maybe you accidentally like hurt them. Like if you give CPR, like you can crack a rib or something like that, and people sue them because they hurt them. So the Good Samaritan laws say you can't be sued if you're actually trying to help people out. Now, 8 states actually have laws called Good Samaritan laws that actually require citizens to help in peril. So Florida, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Ohio, Rhode Island, Vermont, Washington, and Wisconsin say you have to help someone if they're in trouble. If not, then you can be prosecuted. Right? So you can't have the situation like Kitty Genovese where you see someone being stabbed and attacked and not do anything about it. And lastly, we have the duty to rescue. So there's a duty to rescue arises where a person creates a hazardous situation. So if another person then falls into peril because of this hazardous situation, the creator of the hazard has a duty to rescue the individual in peril. So like let's say you started a fire. Well, if you start a fire, you are responsible for saving everyone from that fire, right? So if you create the hazard, you are now responsible to rescue everyone from that hazard. There are other examples of duty to rescue. So like emergency workers, they have a general duty to rescue the public within scope of their employment, but not a duty to a specific individuals, right? So I mean, if you sign up to be an emergency worker, that's essentially your job. You have a general duty to rescue people, not necessarily a specific person, but overall, the public. Parents have a duty to rescue their children. This also applies to, anyone who's acting as a parent, maybe a teacher or a babysitter. You have a duty to rescue the children. So like if we have emergency in school, that's why the teacher is always the last one out of the classroom, right? It's your responsibility to make sure the students are, taken care of and safe. Obviously, the younger the children, the more responsibility like that teacher has. But also as a babysitter, right? So the babysitter has responsibility over the people they're watching. They're like their parents. They have a duty to rescue those people. Common carriers have a duty to rescue their patrons, whether a bus driver, a pilot, or the captain, right? So the picture below, that's Scully. That's the guy who the plane was, I think, hit with birds, and he actually landed the plane in the Hudson River, I believe it was, and saved everyone. There's a good movie they made about that. I think Tom Hanks plays him. I remember after that, he was actually at the Super Bowl. He was a big hero because he saved everyone, landed the plane on the Hudson River, got everyone out safely. So, that's an example. They always say like a captain goes down with his ship. If you've ever seen like the Titanic and stuff like that, the captain goes down. Well, there was a cruise liner in Italy. I'm not sure if the captain was Italian, but he actually left the ship before everyone else left the ship, and 11 people actually died on this cruise liner when it went down. It was actually near the harbor. I forget exactly what happened, but it ended up sinking, and I believe it was 11 people died. Well, that captain was, a lot of people, I know they tried to prosecute him. I'm not exactly sure what happened. I forget what happened with that. It was a few years ago. And that's because they said he had a duty to rescue, right? He shouldn't be, the first one off the ship. He has a duty to make sure everyone is safe. Also, property owners have a duty to rescue guests from all dangers on their property, right? So if someone's on your property, you have a duty to save them, to protect them. One of the reasons why we have homeowners insurance. And lastly, spouses have a duty to rescue each other. Hopefully, anyway, right? You make that commitment. You have that duty to rescue each other if you're in peril.